Tilea's Troubles Special Video 8, Skaven. This special modelling and painting video is going to concentrate only on the figures and war engines and other ratty stuff that have appeared in the videos up to part 114, in the hope of avoiding spoilers. I may have messed up and put glimpses of later projects too, but what can I do? First up, my kit-bashed warp lightning cannon, which was a pretty simple conversion, using an Airfix historical kit. I wanted to come up with a cannon that moved under its own power, having a steampunk sort of look, to go with my scratch-built doom wheel, which appears later on in this video. Deciding to try a direct approach, I purchased the Airfix kit of Trevithick's 1804 Steam Loco, which turned out to be just the thing. I built the kit as it's supposed to be built, which was a blast from the past considering I spent/misspent my youth making Airfix kits, many of them many times over, as I needed whole squads of vehicles for our garden wars. And then later I began building them all again, this time kit-bashing with glee to make them suitable for what we called our games of sci-fi. T-34 tanks became grav tanks, World War II trucks became Mad Max-style post-apoc vehicles, and all sorts of combinations became Star Wars vessels, like these war sleds, and speeder discs, and more war sleighs, utility gravs, ATGTs, Imperial repulsor lift tanks, more of the same, ATPTs, battle crawlers, strange war maze skimmers, the Lynx, more junk freighters, utility crawlers, speeder bees, archaic fighters, mobile ion cannons, this thing, repulsor lift troop transports, and speeder bikes. As Bob Mortimer would say, that sort of thing. I painted the bits while they were still disassembled, which is not something I often do, so that I could use them for a story in my campaign of the time. This was long before Tilea's Troubles, in which a Ratman engineer found the abandoned machine in pieces in a disused mine tunnel. Oh, he was so excited. When I put it together later, I shortened the funnel. Don't ask me why, I've long since forgotten. And I painted the whole thing iron. I liked it already, although there was nothing particularly Skaven-y about it, and it was unarmed. I was hoping the cannon and necessary platforms would give it the right sort of look. So I set about working on a warp lightning cannon to mount on it, and wooden platforms for the Skaven crew to stand on. I put a platform on the back, another long one along the side for the crew to carry out maintenance and access various vital bits. There's no obvious way of feeding coal in or such like, but who cares, because I imagine there was a super hot chunk of warpstone inside, heating the water to create the steam. There's also a huge chunk visible, which powers the cannon, being an old D8, so battered and worn from bashing about more than 2 decades in a dice bag that it no longer rolled fair, and I also sanded it a bit. I painted the warpstone chunk and added a chain ladder at the back for the crew to scramble up and down, which could be lifted onto the platform so that enemies can't use it to get to the crew, or maybe that one Ratman that none of the others like. When I put the first pictures up on the forums, someone pointed out that my warpstone looked like a strawberry, and that I'd forgotten to rust up the gun. So I added yellow lines between the speckles, which I instantly liked, and from then on would become my signature warpstone chunk painting method. Everyone needs a signature warpstone chunk painting method. I also rusted up the gun a little. I was going to make special crewmen on wooden bases to match the platform, but I didn't get round to it for ages when working on other engines. I was proud of this new behemoth. Wondering if it would sit nicely alongside my existing warp lightning cannons, I placed it next to them, and I was delighted to discover it was the Daddy cannon. The Mummy cannon was still impressive. She was made from the standard Games Workshop kit, but in such a way that I got both a cannon and a catapult out of one kit by sharing the pieces between them and adding some extra wheels and balsa bits. Yeah, I admit it, I'm a cheapskate, always looking for ways to get more out of whatever I paid for. My very first cannon, from sometime in the 90s I think, was now the baby of the bunch. It was still quaint, what with its toothpaste top barrel, toy cannon wheels, and an engineer milliputted into some kind of cosplay clanger. But when I sat all three together, the baby one did now look just a wee bit silly. I've had plans for a while now to maybe come up with some rules for a smaller version of a warp lightning cannon, like a tunnel fighting version, but I haven't got round to it yet. Suddenly I noticed there was something wrong with the mummy cannon. Pondering a while, I realised it was the wood-stained frame. It just didn't seem to suit the rest of my army, out of kilter, so to speak. So I painted it, and in my opinion, it looked better. Notice the 3 brass globes feeding some mysterious liquid ingredient into the cannon. They're my favourite part, what I like to call a marvellous addition. See what I did there? Now the mummy cannon matched the catapult that I made out of the rest of the kit. For this, I again added platforms. My favourite bit here is the real beach-combed pebble from the vicinity of Whitby that I used as a counterweight. It has loads of tiny holes in it, which make it seem more like a 28mm scale boulder to me, rather than a real-life scale pebble. Unsatisfied with the unreliability of the firepower here for huge battles, I made another warp lightning cannon later, again being a kit bash, as I don't think any 2 such engines should be alike. This time using Games Workshop parts from both the newer plastic version and the older metal model. Most of the carriage, including the wheels, is from the plastic sprue, while the barrel comes from the older metal model. The 2 crewmen are slightly converted Games Workshop plastics, an old and a newer version. From the rear, you can see part of the engine mechanism I put in it, as this cannon was supposed to be somehow steam-powered too. Like several other models I've made, though, it ended up so obscured by the rest of the model that it's not really visible much at all. Next up, a unique Doom wheel. Part kit bash, part scratch build. I loved the idea of Doom wheels, but wanted, as I so often do, to make my own version, in a steampunky style. So, I began the enjoyable odyssey that fashioning such a mechanical model involves. I preferred steam-powered locomotion, rather than the inner wheel scuttling rats of the official model. Of course, warpstone would be used to heat the steam. I also had the idea that the turning of the wheel generates the power that sparks several other warpstone shards to generate flashes of lightning. I needed some bits for the big wheel, so I started with 3 plastic Pringles tops. Having hoarded a ridiculous amount of rubbish, mostly plastic, in umpteen bits boxes, I found a circular thing which fitted neatly inside one of the lids, which had kind of gear wheel teeth all around it. Originally the innards of a VHS videotape, I think. As the Pringle lids are the waxy sort of plastic, and therefore averse to glue of almost any kind that I know of, I decided to sew the new components in. Then, and this was my clever idea, I stuck masking tape, the yellow paper kind, around the edge of the lids, so that there would be a paper surface to glue the wooden bits onto, rather than a waxy plastic, unstickable surface. I hunted in my bits boxes for anything like wheels, gears, and other appropriate-looking component parts. I cut 4 sections out of one of the lids, putting masking tape on the 4 rungs thus created, then glued lollipop sticks on. I also began making a boiler of sorts out of 2 lids from water bottles, milliputting the holes, and a steam funnel out of a spare Games Workshop cannon barrel. I used some metal wheels to make the main driving wheels that would carry the chain which made the wheel trundle around. I fashioned a rear platform for the operator to stand on, with a boiler and some control levers. For 45p, I bought a thin strip of wood to make the wheel rim. Then I got extravagant and bought brass pins from the same model shop. That way they could be glued and pinned to the rim, the latter more for appearance's sake, but which might add some strength too. I made some kind of inner workings by cutting up bits of plastic tubes and sticks, this supposedly being the machinery that turns motion into a generating spark for the warpstone to flash out its lightning. Wood stain is great for lolly sticks and bits of wood, so I didn't have to paint these sections, and worked well on the brass pin heads too. One warpstone shard was mounted on a rod extending out from between the 2 wheel sections, with a tube going to it to carry whatever it is that Skaven send down such tubes to excite their warpstone. I never worked out the pseudoscience fluff for this component part, I just like the look of it. Then I began mounting the blades that would stick out in front of the wheel, a frame attached to the axle with 2 more pieces of warpstone on the sides. Old Skaven sprues provided this. It's a kind of claw and stone thing intended to form the top of standards. I undercoated the workings and added inner wooden spokes. Wood-stained cardboard had to do for the outer rim of the non-geared wheel, as I couldn't be bothered carving wood to the same effect, nor did I possess the skill. I'd already cut myself once with a scalpel on this project. and there was a limit to how far I am prepared to suffer for 28mm Ratmen's urge to rule the world. Here it is completed. Well, almost. I intended to tune it up later. Here's a side view, showing the flank with the drive chain. There is a wheel on the engine housing behind the boiler, from which a chain runs to the gear wheel on the axis of the big Doom wheel. My warpstone shards were not to everyone's liking, nor my general approach to painting, but I've been doing cartoon style for so long I didn't want to stop now. Besides, it would fit in with my army better if it was painted in a similar style. Later, when I moved to acrylics, 30 years behind just about everyone else, my style changed a bit. From the front, you can see it's an unforgiving war machine. This should account for the impact hits. One wheel looks a bit wonky here, but it's not that noticeable on the actual model. Otherwise, I would have noticed, I assume. The Strength 2 attacks could not be delivered by giant rats running around the wheel, as there were none. So, instead, when the lightning is not flaring out, there remains a relatively weak warp static force dancing and flickering between the three shards, thus in the forward arc, and these shocks are strong enough to deliver the Strength 2 attacks. Low fantasy, magical pseudoscience for the win. Here's the other flank. Steam, heated by warpstone chunks and dust, generates motive power via a boiler and an engine. But then internal gears inside the large wheel generate enough energy to spark the three shards of the warpstone to life. The driver stands, as expected, on the steerage deck. This rear view shows the two controls. The wheel allows the engineer to alter the steam power, and thus the speed. Well, it's supposed to, but it's all a bit random in truth, as per the rules. He can at least frantically try to reduce it by spinning it when it's going a bit too fast, and then when it's going too slow, he can spin wildly in the other direction. The lever at the side jolts the rear wheel, and thus changes the engine's direction. It was only after I took these photos that I noticed I'd forgotten to paint some bits, like the wheels on the end of the arms. So, for thoroughness' sake, here they are painted, except the shard is out of focus. Anywho, here you can see the driver/helmsman. As Jethro Tull sang in Locomotive Breath, "Oh, he feels the piston scraping, steam breaking on his brow. Old Charlie stole the handle and the wheel it won't stop going. No way to slow down." Don't ask me what he does with a warpstone capped rod, otherwise I'll be forced to make up even more pseudoscience about initialising or revitalising various shards with a tap, and even I won't know what I'm going on about. Next, let's look at the terror weapon known variously by the campaign players as the Uber Engine or Super Mortar, or by characters in the game world as the Doom Bombard or Annihilation Mortar. I'm not sure I was ever quite satisfied with any name. Years ago, I entertained the idea of a deliberately silly project to create a super weapon out of a toy. This image shows what I was intending to work with, to model and paint up, but I never did, because it was just a bit too silly and a lot too massive, and I didn't want to invest time in something that would merely raise a chuckle, then never get used, which is odd because I've often done just that. During discussions with my Tilean campaign Skaven player, however, we decided he might be able to employ just such a weapon, by paying supply points and promising to do certain things for Clan Scryer in return. I'm afraid I foolishly deleted most of the photos of the earlier stages when I was trying to create space on my phone for the later pictures. But somehow, two survived. Here you can see an early test to see how it might fit together. The wheel itself was gifted to me already glued, but it would have been impossible to paint, what with all the inaccessible innards, so I hacked it apart and began a bashing. Here are all the pieces undercoated. There is a standard Doom wheel, a toy cannon, I think it might be Playmobil, and various other bits, including wheels. I had more of the cannon barrels, which were used later in the campaign. You'll see eventually. Here are the pictures of the completed model from various angles. My Skaven player in the campaign, and me as GM, came up with rules for it. The general idea I had, while building, was that this was Clan Scryer's attempt to create an army or city destroyer. Inside the huge iron barrel is a warpstone grenado, far bigger and far more potent than the bombs thrown by poisoned wind globadiers. The engine is mechanised, a converter doom wheel, to ensure it moves at sufficient speed, as it must get within range of its target to lob the warpstone bomb, without being destroyed by enemy artillery or troops. Being a Skaven engine, it is unreliable, so it could blow up, centering its table-sized blast radius on itself. If it succeeded in lobbing its bomb, then a city could die. No damage to the buildings, but all life, give or take a few very lucky survivors, would perish. The globe is fused to blow in the air above the city, which was another factor that could go wrong, as if it hit the ground before blowing up, it will have a much lesser effect. I was hoping we might have a scenario game in which the Skaven player had to get this intact from one side of the board to the other. If he did so, then we would roll for it firing. But if anything went wrong, misfiring or crashing, everything on the table could die. Later, in discussion, we came up with the idea that just being near this thing could kill you, due to the poison it constantly leaks. An idea brought out in the video part 99, Keep Going. A beast like this needed attendants. So I ordered sprues for 10 plague monks to convert to make 6 such fellows, suitably enclosed in protective gear. A test model used a Skaven standards bell for a mask muzzle. This seemed satisfactory, and so I continued similarly with the rest. Here are some work-in-progress shots. Each backpack is different, as if they have had to fashion them themselves, and they're carrying a mixture of tools and weapons for defending or attending the Bombard as required. I found some lovely woven cord to use for the breathing tubes. Here they're not based, but otherwise finished. I kit-bashed them using bits of plastic and cord to make filter tanks and masks so that they don't breathe in too much warpstone vapour. They became a test version for the 24-strong guard regiment I modelled later, which I'll include in this video. This was the first time in 40 years I'd worked solely in acrylics, rather than enamels or a combination of both, i.e. enamel undercoat and a mixture of enamel and acrylic on the top. It was also one of the very rare occasions I've used a white undercoat for the majority of the model. I like the guy with a shovel best, as it's such a practical tool for a war machine attendant. His job is to flatten any lumps in the engine's path, to stop it taking a tumble, which could be catastrophic for all nearby. Now for the Bombard's Guard Regiment, which were inspired by the attendants, and again suitably garbed in protective masks and robes. I got busy scratch building and kit bashing to create adequate protective gear to counter the deadly gases leaking constantly from the engine they guard. I played around with bits to make a mask and an air filtration tank. The first mask came together like this, and was milliputted up like this. I messed about with various bits for the backpack tank type things, including sprue, plastruct tubing, wooden rods, tiny brass pins and knitting wool. In the end, I made 2 main varieties of air tanks, an original and an improved version. Here you can see the 4 mast types. 1, the original, with the much better cord that I soon ran out of for the air feeder tube. 2, the pointy version, as I ran out of original shapes taken from ogre sprues. 3, a globe-ended version using the musician's beta end. And 4, called Mark IV. These have real screws inside to hold the waxy plastic component in place. Ranking them up was hell. Here they are, part completed. I was already aware it wasn't going to be easy. Here's the whole regiment. A small one for Skaven at 24 strong, ready for priming, from front and rear. I had the 6 attendants too, so I knew that later in life I could probably use them as a 30-strong regiment. Here they are, almost fully completed. Just a few bits still needed, like the anti-shine varnish, and I'd yet to put some flock on the bases. Like I already said, they were nightmarishly difficult to rank up. So, to make it easier, I double-based 16 of them, so 8 pairs. And even then I had to cut certain individuals off the bases to reposition them very carefully angled to fit between the figures front and behind. Here are a couple of the air tanks. And here you can see the eye lenses. These are the command figures, with not 1, but 2 musicians. I think I got muddled up. And a standard. By the way, the standard bearer does not have a very long arm. That's an ornamental brass hand on the top. They are clan scryer, never known how to pronounce that, so I researched the correct sort of rule. Here are 2 of them close up. These last few pictures show how well the army painter dip worked, applied as a wash with a brush. Well, I think so. This is a major departure from my normal black lining technique, but I love the way it has come out. At this stage, I found a better anti-shine matte varnish and planned to coat them with it to better dull down the shine. I can't remember what it was called. While I'm here, here's an old weapon team model I painted to march with this regiment in battle, using the same technique, a warp fire thrower, I believe. And here is the team after some anti-shine matte varnish was applied. You know, while I'm here I might as well show you some of the earlier kit bash and scratch build Skaven models that I've got pictures of. I had struggled to acquire the official models, what with the price being somewhat challenging, so from the off I was converting stuff for my Skaven army. First, my take on a rattling gun, a fiddly little conversion but fun. I think there are calculator parts in this, and even a button. And here's my own bits and bobs version of a warp fire thrower, with some chunks of sprue and woven cotton thread as straps. Here's an abortive test model. I wondered if I could make my own poison wind globadiers. When I saw the end result, this cross between a womble and a clanger, I changed my mind and forked out on the proper models. Here he is, in amongst the other globadiers in a recent battle, a future video. I think there are 2 generations of the Citadel globadiers here, with a single model of a more old hammer kind. Recently, this regiment has grown even bigger, with the addition of some models loaned to me by a player, which I've painted to match these, so that the company is 15 strong now. If they get near some mounted men-at-arms, there's got to be some damage caused. It seems, at some point, I began to believe I could turn anything into anything, as well as save money. Here you can see my attempt to transform old 1/32 scale, that's 54mm, Airfix World War II American paratroopers into 3 rat ogres. What resulted was, well, let's say, interesting. When I came into possession of some actual Games Workshop rat ogre models, metal and plastic, something more convincing resulted. Here 2 models from War Machine sprues, I think, were bashed together to make it look like one is restraining the other, clutching at chains. And here is the metal one, which I'm pretty sure is an older Citadel model. For Skaven slaves, 60 thereof, thank you very much, I used Games Workshop plastic sprues, as well as a bunch from the old Citadel Warhammer Fancy Regiments plastic sprues, which me and my mates all got circa 1985 or so, then swapped various bits of sprues around between us. I multi-based many of these slaves for ease of play, and I added manacles made of sections cut from plastruct tubes to many of their wrists, where the chains would normally pass through as they were being marched from battle to battle. Here is one of the monoposed mid-80s ones. The bodies were all the same, but there were 2 heads to choose from. Somewhere along the way, I decided I could bulk out the ranks and files of my main regiments with the genius idea, which is unit fillers. Having these would also mean extra photo opportunities for the stories. Here are 3 of them. The first is my favourite. He's stirring up some lovely supper for the rat lads. Nice. Here is a conscientious young fellow who is looking after the halberds. And here is a makeshift marker they built for some reason. All a 4x4, and you can see one of them in the rear ranks of a regiment here, blending in fairly well, I reckon. Here are what we would have called in my youth some cool dudes. The leftmost 2 are Games Workshop plastics, the others are old Citadel metals, I think. I like the plastic sword and buckler fighter, the guy with a pistol, and the standard bearer best. Here are my Jezzails, mostly kit bash / scratch builds, with plastic clan rat warriors as crewmen and fiddly bits from sprues and plastruct pieces. I did 7 of them altogether, I think, and the one with the gun up in the air, as if it's being used as a standard, is my favourite. It marks the model out as unique. Here are the 2 official Citadel models that I was trying to make the others look like. I've more of these official ones now. When a player in a previous campaign needed an extra 9 Jezzails for a battle the next day, I had to really speed things up, and so I came up with these quick bashers, built out of a shield, bits of sprue, pins, and some plastruct pipes, rods and guttering. Then I could add some slaves and create 9 rush job Jezzail teams for the game the next day. Here's another conversion. I wanted a Skaven warlord in an old internet campaign to look impressive, not just another little rat man. I reckoned I could achieve this by mounting him upon something a bit bigger. So I harnessed up a rat ogre, got another bunch of bits together, built and painted the palanquin ogre, I think that's the right term, and painted up the warlord. And at last he was ready. He's already featured in some videos, being Clan Scravel's leader, Warlord Gerthrak, and in the assault of Rivola recently was even skitter-leaped magically from his trusty mount up onto the enemy's battlements. Surprise! just in case you get the impression from this video that I always kitbash, mutilate or convert every rat I get my grubby hands on. I should tell you that most of the time I just paint them as they're supposed to be. In the case of Skaven, that means painting hundreds of the little fellas. Here you can see the 80-strong red-garbed regiment, which can be expanded in size by adding the unit fillers shown earlier, although usually is divided into 2 or even 3 smaller regiments. When I do so, then the regiments are named by the colour of their flags: a yellow regiment, a red regiment, and a brown regiment. These are older Games Workshop plastics. My yellow regiment are more modern Games Workshop plastics. They were painted simultaneously with the Skabskar Rat Ogre Rider, and would eventually become Lord Erlach's personal bodyguard. Not just a yellow standard though, but garbed in yellow, which I reckon is by far the bravest of Skaven colours, as it means the enemy can more easily pick them out for shooting and magic. Yellow equals brave in the topsy-turvy world of ratmen. There are only 30 of them, so it's a small regiment for Skaven, but only 30 idiots could be tricked into dressing in yellow. I've recently done an impressively purple storm vermin regiment, but I can't show them here, as they've not yet featured in the videos. Last of all, before I leave you, here are the most boring pictures of the whole video. End with a whimper, I think that's what they say. They are Skaven related though, so I can get away with it. When doing underground scenes for story photos, I've had to make stage scenery, film background sets, so to speak. Annoyingly, I don't think I ever took workshop shots of the ones I used in the Tilea campaign, like this one, and this one, and this one. But I did take some backstage shots of some from earlier campaigns, like this one and this one. I do hope you've enjoyed this meandering foray into the wacky world of painting and modelling fighting rats and their contrary contraptions. As I always try to remember to say in my special videos, please do like and subscribe and share with fellow hobby enthusiasts, or in a more old-fashioned way, just tell some friends about Tilea's troubles. Part 115 is on its way, and if you like battles, then you'll be pleased to hear it is the prequel to a battle report. Ta-ta for now. Please insert catchphrase here.